I'm Rick from Carthage Classic Cars. On this video, we're back on the 69 Firebird. And you see we got a whole lot of pretty much extra stuff shipped to us from Detroit Speed Engineering, DSE. So I'm not sponsored by them. I went around and I started doing some research at all suspension kits. Obviously, if you watch this video from the beginning, we don't care about originality on this car. There really is nothing that's original. So same thing with the mini tubs we're putting in and everything. We want a suspension that's gonna handle better, ride more comfortable going down the road, and then perform better if I just wanna drive and hot rod this thing a little bit. And after the research I'm doing and everything, I think the Detroit Speed kit is pretty much the way to go for my build. What I'm gonna show you on this video, we're gonna install a lot of these components. We're not going to install all of these components. For instance, these subframe connectors, again, Detroit Speed, I like them. I've used them in the past. The thing about them is we would be able to install them right now with the floor pan and trunk pan and everything, but I like to do subframe connectors at the very end of the project because we want to make sure our gaps and everything are right. The worst thing we could possibly do is, have to shift the body around or move something, but we have this giant subframe connector in a car holding it that we have to fight against. So for me, it's easier. We're going to wait on those, but we are going to install those down the road. The rest of this kit, we got the Detroit Speed Engineering, the trunk closeouts. What these are going to do, these are going to allow an exhaust, a 3-inch exhaust to come in because we're really taking a lot of room with the DSE. You'll see in a minute their cross member kit for their shocks. So this is going to give us a little bit more room, and I feel you also are putting these gussets going from this giant cross member piece over to the frame rail. I mean, it's going to tie in the back end of the car, but for instance, really most of our support on a 4-link is going to be in the front because back here we're not using the leaf spring mounts. But all in all, I don't think you could build a car too stiff or rigid, if the gaps are correct. So we're going to install those. We're going to do the Detroit Speed Quadralink kit. It comes with these swivel links. And what I gather, I'm not an expert on these, but I believe these give a little bit of dampening to stop, twisting and binding up in the vehicle. So we're gonna put those on there. We got the lower links, we got the upper links. It came with the springs and the coilover kits. I got the non-adjustable shocks. Again, I'm not racing this car. We do racing on the circle track and everything. To me, this could be a fun hot rod. For now, I think the non-adjustable coilover is the way to go. I do like this because, changing out with spring, if we think the rear end's riding a little too stiff or a little too soft, is going to be a little bit easier. Not saying you can't do that with leaf springs, but that's a good option. We got the whole bolt kit, and then this is basically going to be the Quadralink kit. These are the brackets for the front. We got our track bar brackets, panhard brackets, whatever they're calling them, and what we are going to do, but not on this video, same thing with the subframe kits. You could see I have the axle brackets separate. We are going to hopefully on this kit build a complete 9-inch housing with the axle brackets when this car gets off the jig. My jig mounts are using the front lower control arm mounts. So really, to be able to bolt all this stuff in there, I have to pull this car off the jig. Obviously, before we do that, we have to finish building the car. So these axle brackets, the lower control arms, and the bolt-on stuff is really going to be a part 2 of the Detroit Speed video for this whole kit right here. But we're going to do as much of this kit in this part 1 series as we can. So right now, another good thing too, I'm not used to this, but we have directions. So I'm going to follow along to the directions. I'm going to modify them for how I'm building this car. What I mean, and the reason why I'm doing this right now, these actually just came in at the perfect time, because what we're going to do first, we're going to remove the wheel mini tubs. Remember I told you on the last video, if not, go back and watch it. Step 1 in this whole kit is pretty much install your mini tubs, but we don't weld them in. So we're going to remove the mini tubs. If you're doing this on a full car, you would just cut out your mini tubs and you would have your quarters on. Everything could be done with the quarters on, but how we're doing it is just going to be easier because I'll be able to access in here a little bit better, get a nicer weld and a more thorough weld, and it'll be better for the filming because I can show you everything at different angles what I'm doing. So we're going to do this whole kit as much much as we can and simulate how you would do it in your garage if you bought the whole kit, because their directions come one direction for the closeout, one for the Quadralink, one for, you know, the subframe connectors, and most of the time, I think they basically have, you know, you just buy their axle kit, which is fine, but like I said, I want to fabricate my own. We're going to do a custom length, being the wheels and everything we're going to do, so I think that'll be a cool video in the future. So stay tuned. The first thing we're going to do, like a lot of the Detroit speed and engineering kits they provide, we're gonna cut out a template and hopefully it's gonna make it a little bit easier. So let's get this stuff put away. Let's get the mini tubs off and we'll start the work. Like I said, the first thing we're going to do is remove the mini tubs. Just a couple sheet metal screws from the previous video was all that's holding these in. Once they're out of the way, it really opens up this whole car with plenty of room. The next thing we need to do is verify our frame jig is leveled out and we're able to work off that, because everything on here needs to be leveled out. The first step in these directions, like I said then, is going to be to cut out the paper template. It's real simple. You just cut right along the dotted lines and remove all the cross section. Now about this template, it comes as one piece in a weird form, then you put the two arrows together. What that does, that helps drop the floor pan area because it's lower on the paper template versus the frame rail section. Once you go ahead, you can see I did trace around the outside of the template, and I just did that just based as my reference where the template is and where we're going to be sanding down. You don't necessarily have to do that, but you could see the template is used the same on the driver's side, and then we flip it over for the passenger side and use it the same on the other side. You could see the seatbelt hole is what locates this template. It's kind of hard to get exactly centered, but we did our best to get it in line with the frame rails as best we could. Once we go ahead and we're happy with this, we're going to go ahead and cut out the actual 4-link upper bracket pockets that we traced out for the template. Saying that, I'm going to actually cut out right along the line. What I'm actually going to plan on doing, I'm planning on going back through and trimming it even more. The reason being is I want to weld the bottom of these brackets, so I really feel that to do that, I'm going to have to cut out wider than the template. But what we're going to do first, now that we did our rough cut, we're going to go ahead and install the new upper link brackets, and we're going to use a seatbelt bolt to hold them in. We're going to try to center them and do our best to, you know, just get them straight for the most part, so we could go underneath the car and we can mark out where we want to open up a little bit more. I'm basically centering it off the wheel tubs, since I believe those are a straight line from what I took earlier. Looking back underneath on this car, you can see what I'm talking about. Actually, their template cut out our spring pockets pretty perfect. But you see, I'm just tracing the line just a little bit more. This one was off center just a little bit, and I'm going to cut the frame rail out, and this is where I'm going to MIG weld right down the inside. Once we get done at the end of this project down the road, we're going to go ahead and really clean it up to give it a smooth, just one piece look, and make sure no water gets up in there. So now with the blue marker now to separate my two, I'm marking my upper mounts, right where it goes down the frame rails, and then these are all the holes I'm gonna put rosette welds in. So the idea is with those upper mounts, we only want to weld into the frame rail. Welding into the sheet metal really isn't going to do anything for us as far as strength with a rosette hold. Then if you look, when I pull the mounts off, you see I'm actually putting X's on the sheet metal part. What we're going to do then, we're going to come back through the bottom of the car and weld through the 18 gauge into the mounts. I think that's going to be the better way, and really in general you always kind of want to back your thicker metal versus your thinner metal when you're doing sheet metal work. So now we're going back through, like I said, we're going to just cut up the frame rail and just make those mounts a little larger. Once we have our cutouts done for our upper spring pockets and we're happy test fitting in the upper spring pockets and looking at the tolerances and everything else, we could come back through and we're going to drill out everywhere we put a blue X for our rosette hole. What I have to do first in my situation is I have to drill a pilot hole first, and then we're coming back with a larger bit. You can see right here we're drilling the pilot hole, and we're going to come back with a larger bit. This will allow us to have access, like I said earlier, from the bottom of the car. We're going to weld through these holes, into the actual spring, the thicker steel on the upper spring mounts. So once we get done drilling these, we're going to turn our attention to the mounts themselves. So we got them in the vise, and again, you can see our pilot holes. Everywhere we put an X, we are going to go back through and we're going to drill a hole. Now this area is, these holes are actually located over the frame rail of the Firebird. So what we're going to do is we can drill through these holes, and then when we weld, we're going to weld through these into the frame rail, which is a similar thickness for the most part. So that will give us the strength we need. Now that all the holes are drilled on the brackets, I went through with an 80 grit and I cleaned up all the metal and the mill scale on these brackets. Then we need to go through, because they're shipped with a grease coating on them, so I just sprayed a little wax and grease remover and I'm wiping down all my bare metal. Once all my bare metal is wiped down, you can see we're using this PBE weld through primer from Seymour. We're going to go ahead and let that dry.
All right, so now that we've got our upper 4-link brackets set in place with the weld through primer and all prepped up, I did some final checking. I had to adjust some things, and I'll show you what I went about and how I went about adjusting them. You're going to have to check this stuff on your car. The key here, don't forget, we're on a level jig. We know the rockers and certain parts of this car are squared off. So the idea right now is make sure the 4-link isn't twisting or binding and everything's straight, so your car's not dog walking where the rear's not following the front going down the road crooked. I know you've seen a car or something where that's happened. So we're going to do our best to prevent that and do some checks to make sure the suspension works as it's designed. So again, there's some design differences in each car to car. So go ahead and check these points. So we're going to take this laser carpenter level thing. What this is going to do, it's going to provide us a straight edge on the car. We're going to hold it, Chase is going to hold it right there on the 4-link bracket. Now, for the most part, we know our rockers are pretty much straight. There is some deviation in the rockers themselves as far as, hammer dents, but we're going to take a general measurement here that this is about 14 1/4 off that jig bracket from the rocker. So if we move up, we're about 14 1/4 there. If we move up here, we're about 14 1/4, just a hair over. We're less than a 1/16 of an inch, and same thing, we're a little over 14 3/16 over. So that far forward, we're just ever so slightly. At this point, we could say maybe it's a problem in the bracket or anything else. I'm not super worried about that. So that basically covers the side-to-side twisting, and we know this 4-link has got to go straight back. The next thing what we are trying to focus on is we want to make sure this bracket is leveled and not cock twisted. So you see right there, I had it in there. Now, what I did have to do on this bracket was kind of hammer this floor down on this edge. It wasn't exactly level where I wanted. Again, we have some deviation in the bracket, but all in all, this is really good for what we're doing. If we look over on this side, same thing. This side is level, but if you look under here, this bracket was having a lot harder time. It might have been the floor, it might have been the frame rails. Now this was all jigged off and measured, so I'm pretty sure the frame rails are level. Again, when I mean we're on level, we're talking less than a 1/16 of an inch, but that's what we're trying to prevent, is any kind of binding. So, and you can see I can move this bracket and there's some deviation in the bracket, right there we're actually even more perfect. But what we're trying to do, we pulled this bar down, twisting this top around, and how I did that, I put a ratchet strap underneath this car and I cranked down on it. So I'm hoping when I weld this in place, all the heat's gonna settle this bracket, and again, we should be good to go. Now, the last measurements that I took that I want to verify is I came off the rocker and we're 7.5 inches from the rocker to this bracket. If we look over on this side, same thing. We're looking 7.5 inches to there. Now, what else we're looking at both sides, we're about 4.5 inches from the wheel tub all the way up. So What this is showing us is our upper brackets, for the most part, are squared in the car and everything's straight. This is the certain things that you need to keep verifying to make sure your car is not going down the road. You can't just, I don't know, it doesn't say it in the directions on the Detroit Speed Kit, but my opinion, you can't just throw a bolt in the seatbelt hole and just call it a day, hope for the best. This is where we just fine tune the car and we're just trying for a balance, perfectly straight feel where there's no binding. So now that we did that, let's pull out the welder and get to welding these brackets in, and we'll move on to the next step. All right, so one more thing I forgot before we start welding. What I did, I took a flat drill bit. Now, we have these plates, like I said, that are cleaned up. Now, you see we got the floor pan thin 18 gauge sheet metal, and then we have the 16 gauge frame rail underneath. So what I did, I basically went through all these holes and I drilled through the 18 gauge floor pan. So then we're trying to access the frame rail underneath. Remember that we're drilled our holes right where the frame rail is. So what that's gonna allow us to do when I weld, we're gonna weld right to the frame rail, not to 18 gauge. I mean, it would probably penetrate anyway, but this is our extra. Let's just make this even stronger. So another tip, make sure you try to do that when doing this.
So now all the fun starts. We're going to go ahead and tack in the brackets, the perimeters of them. What we don't want to do is start putting a bunch of heat on one side of them and worry about them lifting off the floor, because this is such thick metal and they're so rigid that getting them back down once we weld is going to be kind of hard. We also need to verify everything before we start welding these things. We're going to weld them in so much, and top and bottom, that we're pretty much going to have to remove this floor if we ever have to get these brackets off. So hopefully this kit is here to stay and it'll be in this car for many years to come. I'm gonna weld around the perimeter of these brackets. There's nothing that says you have to weld around the perimeter of these brackets. I've seen a lot of people not weld around the perimeter of these brackets. To me, I just think it looks cleaner with the extra weld, and I feel it's gonna just be even a little bit stronger, even though how they're put in there, I don't think we really need to. But I want the best handling car. I want to keep moisture out. Like I said, we got the weld through primer between the surfaces, but the area on top that we're gonna weld is really clean. We're going to take our look to the bottom now with the welding, and what we're going to end up doing, you see, same thing on the outside. We're just tacking around the edges after we tapped up all the metal in the brackets, and I'm going to come back through. Like I said, we're going to put a strong weld around the whole inside of these brackets. The idea behind this part though is when in the future we're going to come back through and we're going to clean this up, so when you look underneath, everything looks smooth and rounded into the pocket itself. Turn our attention to the last bracket. You can see I'm working my way down the frame rail. Same concept. I'm just connecting the frame rail to the inside of the bracket. Between that weld and the inside rosette MIG welds, this bracket, these upper links, I mean, this car can have a ton of horsepower, and I'm not really worried about breaking them.
I finished getting the upper 4-link brackets completely welded in. You could see I ground down just the front edges where I did the plug welds. We're going to leave the perimeter welds in place, as you know, the brackets themselves came welded with the cups in there. So I just think my welds, it's all going to be under carpet. Anything else, I don't think, personally for me, there's any reason to clean it up, and they don't look that bad. As far as underneath on these brackets, we're gonna clean them up, but that's gonna be down the road. This car is gonna end up eventually on a rotisserie, and we're gonna be able to dress the whole underside of this car. So if you wanna go ahead and clean your brackets up and make them look cleaner from the bottom before whatever you put underneath the car, go ahead and do that and finish out those brackets. Now, that was pretty much step 1, A, B, and C on the directions on the Detroit Speed Kit. You can see there's a lot to it. The second part is going to be the shock tower cross member piece. So what we're looking at, the directions said measure for 69 Camaro 36 1/4 from this back rear tail panel. So we went 36 1/4 to one side, we did it to the other side, and then what I did, I took same thing with the laser level like we did before, and we basically put it on this base, magnetized it, and we got it straight, and we're able to hand trace across with the paint marker. Then what it said was to go 6 inches back over here And so we went to 6 inches there, and what it also said, basically what I heard, you're gonna look at 6 5/8. So your distance, since you're going down on an angle, is gonna be 6 5/8 inches. So we basically made a couple marks off there at 6 5/8 inches. Then again, same thing with this laser. We took that, we put them on, you know, on this area, and we're basically same concept. Able to connect the dots, traced our line. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna verify a couple measurements. Basically, actually it said right here, the back frame rail to frame rail is 37.5. So you're cutting from here to the corresponding side, 37.5, and actually what else we're gonna do, we don't wanna cut the frame rail. So what we're gonna look at, we're gonna try to come in, I'm gonna, just to verify, we're gonna cut a little bit out there, and then we're gonna work our way in a couple cups. Same thing, when I cut this, I'm gonna cut on the inside of these things, and we're gonna keep test fitting our piece till we get it right. And then the front piece, so from the edge of this frame rail to that frame rail is gonna be 35.5 inches. So we're gonna verify these measurements, we're gonna come back, we'll get the bar down, clean everything up, and we'll start cutting this piece out and keep test fitting until we get our final fitment that we're happy with. So stay tuned, we'll come back and we'll start cutting.
Now that we triple checked everything, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna cut it. Like I said, I'm right on the inside of the line. That should give me where we're close enough that I know we're pretty much on, but that should give me a little bit of wiggle room that I could kind of grind out if needed. Now saying that, you could see I'm not cutting the frame rails on each side. We're basically running the floor pan cut right along the top of those areas. That's gonna seal up the area. There's no reason to cut the floor pan and have access to that inside rail. So we're just using the 18 gauge there to protect it. Like I said, triple check your measurements, because if you mess this up, you're pretty much putting a trunk floor in this video. Once we set this cross rail in place, I'm going to go ahead and pull it all the way to my mini tub on the edge. You see I'm using a straight edge just to make sure we're right there, and then we're going to clamp it down in place. You can see the fitment does fit pretty good in general. On the driver's side, we are going to have to make, you can see in this picture a little bit, some brackets to fill up the gaps. It's just designed that way, and you know, the variances in it, so be prepared for that. You're going to have to add a little bit of sheet metal. Now that we got everything clamped down, we're going to go ahead with a paint marker, and we're going to trace the bottom of the front. The back actually lined up perfect with the trunk pan. There's no height difference or anything else. So once we got our mark cut in place, again, we're going to come back through and we're going to grind the rest of it, but we're going to cut the paint marker where we made our line. So the idea is that this whole cross member will line up with the floor and isn't going to stick down and look out of place. It should, when the car's all cleaned up and it's all done, it should be almost like a seamless transition, that everything just rolls together and fits together and looks like it's made to be there. That's the whole idea of what we're trying to do here. If you want to err on the side of caution, I would say go ahead and let this piece be a little bit longer and stick down below the trunk pan. Then when it's in the car, you can go back through and grind it up level for an even tight fit.
Now we got our shock cross member all mocked up and cut out and ground down, fitting pretty good. You could see I went through and I started cutting out a lot more of this trunk pan. What we're going to end up doing right now is we're going to kind of deviate from the directions just a little bit, and we're going to do the trunk closeouts. Usually, you know, I think most people, unless you're running a down exhaust or a side exhaust on one of these cars, you really need that exhaust clearance and everything. So I think the trunk closeouts are the way to go. The reason we're going to do them now is if we have this big center section here, it's kind of hard to measure, and then the floor pan we don't want to tack in place or weld, because now that's an area that we'd have to remove. So to me, right now is the easiest time to be able to cut them in here, get the clearance we need, and kind of work around, and we'll test fit the cross member on and off while we're working these trunk closeouts. Now, you can see I already did this side. I wanted to figure it out. There's not a lot of directions on the closeouts. You basically, they're almost like a universal fit, that they're just cut. And a couple things to know is, with the closeouts, they're a little bit larger. What we ended up with was, you could see about
that much smaller. So we did have to cut around the frame rail area here, and then we trimmed a little bit off this edge, and I did personally take the lip off of it. I don't like the way it looked. Another consideration on the F-body cars and why we have to cut it down, there's a gas tank strap right here. You can't cut your gas tank strap or else you're gonna have major issues trying to mount the gas tank. So some things to keep in mind. What I ended up doing and what worked for me on trial and error was I basically made a cardboard template of the original DSE trunk closeout. And instead of cutting the closeout in case I messed it up, I cut the cardboard the same size, and I basically slit down at the bottom of the floor pan, just a line right down there where I was able to get the cardboard in there. I was able to slide the cardboard in there and work it and keep sliding it in till I basically found a pretty good area that worked for me and what I was looking to do, avoiding, like I said, the gas tank strap and everything. Then I basically came with the laser level, and you see the trunk sagging down now. That's why we're going to do one side at a time. If I cut the other side, this trunk is going to keep sagging down and get weaker and weaker, and you see how much we can lift up. But basically I put the laser on it, and that's pretty much about what my mark was, because if you look, we're close to the size, you know, once I start cutting it up and everything. So we cut our straight line off the trunk floor, like I said, lifting it up, that's about where we ended up. And I was able to come back through again and kind of fine tune the cardboard at the height and get the right height there. Once I was able to do that, I did my final mark going down, and then I basically turned this to the DSE closeout and traced it and started kind of easing back on that. What that left us was this closeout. Here is what I'm done. I cleaned it up and it's prepared for weld. I also, you see, I prepped most of this trunk area down to bare metal. There's weld through primer under this frame rail area and on this closeout here. The reason being, this is going to be sandwiched underneath, so we need to make sure that it's protected when we can't access it again. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to tack this in right now, and we're going to lift the floor up, and that should give us our structure, and we're going to put our shock cross member, and you kind of see how this is starting to go together. So let's get the welder real quick. Let's tack it up, make sure everything fits. This is going to be the first time it's going to fit with the shock cross member, because I only had, you know, 2 hands to hold everything, so we'll see how it goes. But the idea is it's going to go in like that. I did the same thing right here that I did as I showed you on the shock cross member. I had it all hanging down, and I basically traced it to the floor cutout. So what we're going to do, we're going to get it tacked in here. We're going to lift this up a little bit, and we're going to get the floor where we want it. So all right, so see, that's our play right there. What we're going to try to do now, see, this is going to have a little bit of give. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to level this here, and I'm going to tack it to the frame underneath. So what that's going to do, that's going to support this without the trunk floor. So we actually got to come right there is about level. So if I can hold that, give or take, and it doesn't have to be perfect. We're just trying to, you know, get it close. So right there is a 0, 0. Let's see if that'll stay. Actually, that's good. So I actually pulled it up just a hair. I mean, we're talking 0.2 degree level here. So what that's going to allow us to do now, we should be able to take this trunk floor and tack it in a couple spots. And I'm checking the bottom, so right there looks good. And so that, look how much that strengthened the floor up. So that's exactly what we're looking to do.
before we cut out the other side. I'll put a couple more tacks on this once I verify it fits. But all in all, you can see we're gonna come through, and I'll show you, actually we'll throw the shock cross member in there. So shock cross member should fit right in place. Now another thing, I'll show you what we're gonna have to do. Actually, another thing you need to verify, if you see that, see, once we clamp it down, it's 0, 0 on the level. This has to be level too. So something to make sure to verify. Now, we are gonna trace, I don't have a pen on me, but we're gonna trace this just like we did the floor, because now our trunk closeout goes up a little bit. So we're gonna come up here, we're gonna retrace this, cut that out, and that's gonna be our difference on this side, because again, we want the bottom to be real smooth. Our patches we're gonna have to do. We're gonna have to do a corner patch here, and now the floor, now this we didn't cut this side at all, remember, knowing what we're doing here, but now that we folded the floor down to give us that extra clearance and everything, we're gonna have to put a little patch right here. I think the other side's good because I pushed it all the way that way. So we're gonna finish tacking this in. We're not gonna do anything with this until the other side looks like this side and the whole trunk fully supported. Then we're gonna make our patches. I'll show you some pictures of them, and then we're gonna tack everything in. Once we verify that, we're gonna go ahead and weld everything back here. We got a little more prepping to do, so stay tuned. I'll try to show you some highlights on the other side, and we'll see where that takes us.
So now that we got the driver's side trunk closeout finished, we're going to try to make it easier, being that we want both of these sides mirrored off each other and looking exactly the same and symmetrical. So what we're going to do, it should be easier in a lot of senses, we're going to take our same template we made for the driver's side, and now we flip it over. Once we do that, you could see we don't have to figure out where we got to cut the cardboard at this point and where we're going to clearance everything. You know, we're still going to go through the process to make sure we're not cutting too much, but you could see I'm already lined up with the frame rail where it needs to go upside down, and I'm able to kind of just slide this cardboard template in there, mark my cross pattern. Then, like I said, I'm trying to lift it up to get it about the same, and we're going to go ahead and put our laser on it, and you see I just traced a line like I said. Now we go ahead and we cut out our piece. Once we finish doing this, we're going to go ahead and we'll take our closeout bracket. After test fitting the cardboard one time, we're going to take the closeout and we're going to trace it right on top of with the paint marker. Make sure you trace it the right way. So the same direction you see I have the closeout laying in front of the trunk is how we do the cardboard.
Now that we got our trunk closeouts tack welded in place, we're gonna kind of step away from the directions. I'm gonna kind of reinvent kind of what I want to do with this after looking at the project forward. So I believe they want everything welded up now, and then we're gonna mess with the upper track bar bracket, but we're going to do this a little different. So I got the shock tower cross member in place. It's just tacked right here. The reason it's tacked right here is I want to pull this bracket open just a little bit, and I also want to level it out. So right now we're at 0.1 degree, 0, there you go. So the variance in, so we're 0 degrees that way, and we're 0 degrees leveled this way. So what we're trying to do now, like I said, this is just clamped on the other side. We're gonna be able to remove this. The idea is we wanna get this upper track bar up in this pocket, and we want to pretty much get it fit where we think it's going to be, you know, level, square, everything. I'll show you how we're going to do that. So, and then the idea is we're going to remove this top bracket and finish welding it, because we can't get to some of these areas without removing that shock tower bracket. So let's go ahead and fit it up and see what we got going on. So you can see it's going to be snug going up in there. You want it all the way against the frame this way. And what we're gonna do, we're gonna check. So we're 89 degrees. So we gotta go
89.7, 89.9. If that one's good there, what we're gonna try to do, we're gonna try to get it this way, and look, we're right on 90 there. So 90 there, 89, 90, depending on where we put it, 89.9, and 0.2. At this point, I'm gonna say, before we mess with it, we're gonna try to tack weld it in place. So let's go ahead and tack it and then check it. Actually, now that we got that one tack on there, let's see if we can adjust it just ever so slightly. It shouldn't fall down now. So it's gotta go. $89.7 might be. 90. There's 90. 89.5. So we gotta go a hair. So what we're gonna do, since we're 90 here, 89.90, we're gonna hold this here, and then we're gonna try to give it one pop to shoot it the other way. Actually, let's check one more thing, which we should be good. Yeah, 0.1. What we're trying to do, we're trying to prevent the track bar when it comes down from twisting and binding. That's the whole idea. And 0.1 degree, again, 90 there. And like I said, this one's got to get shot that way now. So let's take the hammer, now that we're tacked in there. 89.5. 89.4. Actually, that will help it more than the 89.9. So one more tap. Yeah, 89.8, 89.7. I think right now that's gonna be good to go. What we're gonna do, I'm gonna tack this corner up as I'm kind of pushing it, and we're gonna try to get a tack back here. Then you're gonna say, let's do that first. All right, so again, we got 89.7 here, 89.9 there, 0.2. Like I said, at this point, we're not even saying that those bolts are exactly dead even on the bottom. So again, when we're talking about leveling it out, there's 0 if I just do that. So that's how close we are. So we're good there. Let's take a look at the top. Actually, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna weld this up right now, just this bottom area that we tacked up. That's gonna hold this in place. As I'm welding, I'm gonna tack it a couple more times, check it, then we're gonna weld it solid. We're gonna pull this top apart, and I'll bring you to the other side and show you why we did it this way. So now that we got the track bar bracket welded in, you can see the welds right around the perimeter. They look really good. Another good thing, I am going to be able to access without the mini tubs, and this is another reason why we chose to do this bracket and everything now. We can get in this area and then weld up on both sides, making this really strong. I was gonna take this bracket out, but you can see now we got everything set at 0, and what I was worried about, there's a bracket in here coming off the track bar, and I was thinking if we pull this off, I can weld in from this corner. But come to thinking, and we're modifying the plan as we go, being that I've never done this, we actually just cut this little access hole. That's why we just tack everything in place right now. So it was easy to cut the bottom, and like I said, I just sliced the top,
we're gonna weld the track bar in there permanently. We're gonna fold this access door back down, tack it, clean it up, and you should never know. So where we're at right now, everything looks good. I think everything's set in place. We're gonna just start welding stuff. There was another bracket that we cut right under here. You can look that the track bar actually is supposed to be a part of it. So if you have these closeouts, remember, leave this long until you get your track bar on there, or you're gonna have to do what I did right there and just add a plate to it. So Megan's gonna help me. We're gonna kind of just pull up on this floor a little bit on the edge just to get everything lined up really good. I kind of want to get those edges on there. And we're gonna finish tacking everything in place, make sure everything looks good, do one more final checkup, and then we're gonna just go start welding this whole setup, and pretty much the car portion of this is gonna be done. So stay tuned. We'll finish this up. I think we're gonna throw it in some epoxy because we got so much bare metal, and then we'll come back for a final thought.
Now that we got everything completely tacked in place, about an inch, inch and a quarter apart, we're gonna go ahead and start the complete welding of this, DSE, Quadralink, and closeout kit. What you could see, I already started welding some of it. I really did get good penetration coming through that thick metal. Look at your welder and verify what settings you need to start if you're unfamiliar. This kit, I feel you do have to spend the time, and you really should be a good welder since it is a suspension kit. So practice, practice, practice. What I'm doing, you could see, I'm pretty much running a straight bead on this whole entire kit. And what I'm doing, I'm focusing my heat on the thicker metal, and I'm kind of just easing it down and let gravity help me onto the thinner gauge floor pan. On the thick to thick stuff, the DSE closeout to the shock cross member, I turn my heat up. Like I said, I'm just powering through that, and I'm just running a constant straight hot weld with good penetration. Now that we have all the welding finalized, I'm going to go ahead and take 120 grit on a DA palm sander, and we're going to really go through the entire back clip of this car to prepare it for 2 coats of epoxy primer. The reason we're doing this, we already have a lot of bare metal exposed with the new parts that we put in, and really it's going to be easier now versus when the quarter panels are on to get most of this in a good epoxy in case we really can't get in certain areas and everything else. I am going to leave the areas where we have weld through primer. There's a couple of spots that just need to be touched up. After this epoxy dries, we'll go through it and we'll be able to weld up those areas. We don't want to apply the epoxy where we're going to put new panels or we're going to weld on, because it's just something else we have to take off. You also don't have to take this down to bare metal. I try to do my best. You can see at this point how much we really did take down, and again, we're coming back through like earlier with the wax and grease remover. I got this in a paint sprayer, and I'm just pretty much coating the whole entire area that we're going to go ahead and prime. And what I do, I let it sit for a minute or two just to really soak up. You can see I got good coverage on everything, and we wipe it down. This is going to air dry, so in about 5 minutes, this whole car will be dry and ready to be sprayed with the epoxy primer. We're about to spray the first coat of epoxy primer. We're using the Omni MP 170 series, the black version of epoxy primer, and it's mixed on a 2 parts primer, 1 part catalyst, and I added half a part of acetone. So you see, we're just going to put 2 good coats on this whole thing, covering everything. Underneath, I did like a spray area where I just covered most of the areas that were bare metal, because underneath, it's going to be easier to DA the whole car when it's on the rotisserie, and there's a couple other spots that I really do need to touch up and just make a little bit better. But the top we'll just do one time all together.
All right, we're gonna wrap up our video on the 69 Firebird Quadralink rear suspension install from DSE. This could be a part 1 video. As you could see, we just did the portion of the car in this video. I put the mini tubs back in. You can see everything's fit up really good. Nothing's welded yet because we still might have to move these wheel houses up or down depending on how the quarter set. That's going to be the next video. I think we're going to do a couple patches on it and start fitting some of these parts back here on the rear of the car. We're waiting on 1 or 2 more parts for that. Now, saying that,
you see how we did this kit. It's, you know, kind of a little bit out of ordinary. I think a key takeaway on this video is plan your build. This car was built in my head before it even rolled into the shop. I think to save yourself time and effort, plan your build, because if you know what you're gonna do and what route you're gonna go, this kit was a lot easier to install when we're not welding in, reaching over quarters. You know, I've done a car one time that I was doing wheel tubs in it, mini tubs, and I asked the owner, well, you want to put quarter panels on because they had all Bondo on. No, he said he was happy with the quarter panels. Well, then 2 weeks later, after spending so much more time on the mini tubs, we ended up cutting the quarter panels off the car. So what you're going to do, the build is important. Just stick with it and come with a plan, and it will make the whole process easier. So saying that, I know what else we're gonna do. We got a couple other parts. Obviously, this car is not stock at all. Nothing was original on the car. It's not a high valued model car. So we're really going with the aftermarket, more modern approach to it if you haven't seen it. So there's a couple other things we're gonna put in this car, and I'll show you on the video, but let's go back to wrapping up the video on the suspension kit. You could see the front brackets, everything was in epoxy primer. They came out really good. You could see, I talked to DSE, and what I'm worried about, and I'll show this on the next video because we're still waiting for the seat to arrive in this car, is they said the seat should be able to fit between these two upper spring brackets. So I'll give an update on that and let you know what modifications we had to do with the mini tubs and those brackets. Looking underneath the car, same thing. I said I wasn't going to clean up those spring pockets, but I just couldn't let them sit for that long. So I took the grinding disc and 80 grit on a sanding belt and cleaned up the right pocket, the left pocket, everything underneath I ground smooth. I really like the look of, you know, the transition of the floor to the DSE kit and back. So looking underneath, when, you know, whatever we put underneath the car, it should look really clean, especially with the suspension in place. Moving our way up to the top of this kit, same thing. You gotta remember, this floor, this is just 2 coats of epoxy on a brand new floor pan that, you know, we basically sanded down almost to bare metal. Now with the epoxy, it almost looks better than some show cars you see. So we still have some work to do on it, but I like the welds. I left them up top. I mean, it's your own preference what you want to do. I think when we get ready to paint this trunk area, we're going to just take some self-leveling seam sealer and just neatly put it a little bit over the weld just to give it a little bit smoother transition. But personally, this is the look I like. You can really see now with the highlight on the new trunk pan we put in, our spot welder and how good they look, the pro spot there. So the next step on this video, like I said, we got to start working on the back end. As far as the Quadralink system, there is going to be, like I said, a part 2. We got to put suspension under this car. We got all the rod ends to install. We got to make sure the rear seat fits. So some things that I'm planning on the future, this also this is what we're gonna hopefully install for the rear end. You can see it's a 9-inch section that's in pieces. You know, we got really thick axle tubes, everything else. So we're gonna get the wheels and we're gonna do a custom cut to fit complete rear end for this car. So I still have to buy the housing ends depending on the brakes I'm gonna run and everything else, but this is kind of on the future build and a part 2 of the DSE kit. So if you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. If you're not really into the Pontiacs and the Firebirds and you made it this long watching, man, extra thank you to that. I know we get a lot of support on guys that, you know, these aren't their favorite cars, but they still watch it because they support us. I try to put all kind of cars on the channel. You know, we do a lot of Mopars. We have, you know, we're going to do a couple Mustangs. There's some stuff down the road I have planned. We're trying to grow the channel, everything else. So again, thank you very much for your support. The channel is growing a lot more than I ever would have thought. And stay tuned. We'll get some more builds when I find the right cars I feel coming in that would best suit like an entire channel series build for it. So again, thank you very much, and next video we'll get kicking on this. We got some other videos. There's a lot of cars in the shop, so I'll be jumping around to some other things. So we'll see you in the next video. I'm Rick from Carthage Classic Cars.